Hello and welcome to another episode of For the Love of Sports. My name is Michael Rasile, and I have my really good friend Jeremy Wright here to talk about his favorite thing in the world aside from his wife and his dog,
Ooh,
soccer. There we go. What's up, buddy? How are you tonight?
that was an amazing intro, and I'm
Thank
doing
you.
great. I'm very excited. Love you, wife, wherever she is. And yeah, we're ready to go.
You said that loud enough so she could hear. You know she's in what is that? Distance. She's close enough that she could absolutely hear. So that was very nice of you to do that. But appreciate you coming on, man. Definitely very excited to get to talk a little bit about the thing, as I said, that you love so much. Get to talk about something that I don't really know too much about, but with everything coming back and everything kind of it's gonna be sports, man. Like, it's sports, so I'm absolutely
Oh, yeah,
interested in watching it. I'm probably gonna watch some of it with you, which is gonna be a lot of fun. So, yeah,
absolutely.
it should be a good time. But yeah, man. So tell me a little bit about yourself. I guess where does your love of soccer really come from?
Yeah, so I have been playing soccer for over 20 years. I started when I was like, 4 or 5, somewhere in there. I got in like the little pee-wee camps and stuff like that. And it just really clicked with me. It was like my favorite sport all growing up. I had the fortune of playing, throughout high school and college. And, past college, I've still been playing with like, adult leagues around where I live. So it's just been a wonderful way to, make friends, to, just converse with people that you wouldn't expect that would like soccer. I've had plenty of opportunities to travel the world and talk to lots of people about their love of soccer. And it's such a cool thing that just unites anyone from any background. So, and there's such an energy to soccer that I feel like you don't get with necessarily other sports as
Mhm.
much. Anybody who's ever been to a live game can attest to that. Like it's truly, there's no atmosphere quite like it. So I think those were like the huge drawing points to me, and
Mhm.
that's why I've wanted to, pursue it for as long as I have. And it's hopefully as long as my knees don't give out on me, I'm going to keep playing for, another 20 years would be great. So
Well, keep going. I'm sure your team would love it. Shout out to your brother, of course, Nick Wright, also another good friend of mine. You guys just take down that adult league. You put it humbly, but I think you're like back to back to back champions in some capacity. So it's always nice to see not only are you playing, but you're crushing while you're there. And shout out, actually, now that I think about it, your old soccer coach was actually already on the show, Peter Urich. Go back a few episodes. He was on there. It's on YouTube. It's on LinkedIn Live. He's also in the podcast, obviously, and that was a really interesting one. He's got some good stories about Jeremy. So shout out, Coach Urich. What a good
yeah, he
gentleman.
was definitely pretty honest, which I appreciated. It's interesting to hear his side of things, and I'd have to agree with it. His take on my playing career in high school. I think he nailed it on the head for sure.
Hey man, as long as he wasn't lying, that's all we're here for. So
Yes,
today we are going to be talking a little bit about the English Premier League. Yeah, English Premier League. That's a mouthful. The EPL.
we call it
And
EPL. It's easier. Yeah.
yes, yeah, obviously, quickly found that one out. And we're also going to be talking a little bit about the Champions League because obviously everything kind of is a feeder up to that anyway. So I think the first thing we do have to discuss is the player safety, right? I mean, like with all these leagues coming back, we're seeing basketball coming back. I mean, today we're seeing some NFL teams go to camp and now they're all starting to test positive. A lot of college teams have already had that. I mean, it's happened to Bama, it's happened to a couple places as well of note. So I guess what are these powers that be? Again, this is a gigantic money making machine, and we all understand we want sports back, but we also have to make sure these guys are being healthy and they're safe. So, what are some of
Absolutely.
the things that these, again, the powers, the owners, the health officials are saying to make sure that these players will be as safe as possible within, I'm assuming some sort of type like bubble situation?
Right. So, it's very interesting just to see it from the United States perspective because, we're handling things totally different than all the countries around the world. And especially in regards to the way Europe's handling all the different soccer leagues. Like, right when this first was beginning, there are several leagues that kind of just said right off the beginning, we're just canceling the season, moving on to the next one, which is disappointing for everyone in those countries and for those of us that liked watching them. But thankfully, there's countries like Germany who have been playing for a little while now, which has been great. The Spanish league just started up this past weekend. England's starting up in 2 days, so it's really exciting time. But it really is like a country by country difference between how they're really going about it. But there's definitely a lot of similarities between all of them. Player safety is really, really huge, of course, and they also have to think about all the different staff that have to be there. It's not just the players; there's all the, coaches, assistant coaches, the referees, the people who actually have to go to the stadiums and broadcast the game. So it's not as simple as sending out 22 guys, say play soccer, we'll leave.
Yeah.
Um, But with in England, at least, what's been interesting is since they've been waiting so long to get started, they've been doing some stuff that's been, in my eyes, something that the American sports could really benefit from using, like following their model. It's stuff you would expect teams to do would be, test each and every week to see which players are potentially positive for the virus. If anybody is positive, they're immediately, sent home. It could be a player, it could be somebody bringing water to the guys. Everybody in these arenas, these training grounds, they have to be tested. And that's something that's really going to be ongoing indefinitely. It's not like this is going away. So that's kind of a simple thing to begin with. Another interesting thing that they're doing is they're using these things called like a clinical passport, if you will. And that's more or less just a thing that these players, staff, and et cetera, they can have like on their cell phone, or they can literally bring this little documentation with them. And this thing more or less says that within the last 5 days, week, whatever it is, I have not had corona. You can see my documentation. So it's really proving that every single time they come here, they're telling the truth. Because, temperature checks can only go so far. Those tests can only go so far. So it's like layer of being secure with all this. So it seems really smart to me. It seems like it's been working okay. A lot of players are very mixed feelings about this because we just think of it, there's just, machines, they go play the sport, they go home. But, so many of these people have families that they have to consider, and a lot of like the bigger players are like, why am I going to go risk the health of my child to play soccer, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's the people, like the argument that, they, the owners are just trying to start this, or again, the leagues are just trying to start this because of money. I mean, obviously, right? Like there's a lot of people that do benefit from this, from that guy that brings water, right? Like there's a lot of full-time jobs that come with a team and something that is going on, in the sports world. But the people that say like, oh, they're only doing this to make money. I mean, if any of these players test positive, that's a huge problem, for the player and their family, of course, but also for the team, right? They're smashing all these games into a really ridiculously condensed period. So they want to make sure all of these players are as safe and as healthy as possible, because if you get one of your top players gone for a minimum of 2 weeks, that's
it's
pretty
huge.
huge, right? So it's not like they're just kind of go all willy-nilly. So I think it's really interesting, as you said, how they're really going about this process to make sure that not just the players are safe, but the guys that bring the water, the trainers, the staff, everyone's safe. Now, some of the stuff, in my opinion, is just like ridiculous. Like I've been watching German soccer. I know you've been watching it a little bit too. And it's like on the bench, they have to sit in like different rows and wear masks. But when they're on the field running into each other, like I watched 2 dudes knock heads and one guy got unconscious. You're telling me like no breath was shared, so it's like, all right, it's optics, whatever. But
that's a big part of it.
Everything else seems like it is a pretty legit thing that they're trying to do to make sure that these guys are spaced out, they're healthy, they're doing everything they need to. Is there anything else that they're trying to do, I guess, health wise? As you said, that passport's really interesting, but like, how does it work? Like, does like a doctor have to sign it or like stamp it or something? Like, how exactly does it work?
So it's a little unclear because this is, a fluid situation as it has been the whole time. But for my understanding, it's like every time they get tested by their team, it gets put into this little passport thingy, whatever you want to call it. And that's kind of how they document it. And if there's like any symptoms that would be indicating you might have corona, that's on there. So that way they can kind of track it. And that way, if someone on the team does have it, they can see when it happened, who they might have been in contact with, and they can try and, separate those people away, that type of thing.
Very interesting. And yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it's a respiratory illness. It's a respiratory virus. So breathing is pretty important, especially to soccer players. You guys run around a lot. So I think that is definitely pretty important when it comes down to it. And I guess in terms of conditioning, what is the EPL doing, and what are the owners, the teams, the leagues doing to make sure that, again, these dudes, it's you can run a lot, you can do things, but there's no such, you only get in game shape by playing games, right? So what are they doing to make sure that there's a little bit of leeway, I guess, for these teams to kind of work with in terms of that?
Yeah, well, as this situation has developed, the powers that be that control these things, they've been, slowly letting the players, pass more restrictions. Like several weeks back, they let the players start like individual training on a field, like they weren't allowed to be around anyone. Then they kind of slowly started to get it back to normal. Within the last couple of weeks, they've allowed teams to like scrimmage each other. Same thing, empty stadiums, but they're still letting that happen. And a smart decision that was passed for like all European teams around the world and other teams around the world was that they changed the amount of substitutes you're allowed to have per game. Because on a typical game, you can only make your 3 subs just because they want to keep the pace going. They don't want to, slow it down or anything like that. But now what they're doing is they're allowing teams up to 6 subs, which is, of course, for the safety of the players. These guys haven't had their normal training routine for the past several months, so they're not going to be in their total fitness. So they're thinking, not only these guys out of shape potentially, but they have to play so many games, so many days. Let's try and limit the wear and tear in their body, so that way we don't sacrifice next season because so many guys are tearing ACLs or whatever, that kind of thing. But the smart thing that they did is they said you can't make 6 individual substitutions throughout a game because that would be awful. If 2 teams made a total of 12 subs, that would be so boring. So what they limited it to is that you can have like 3 substitution periods per game. So it's like you can, put on 2 guys at one point or spread it out however you want, that kind of thing. Okay. So it's still, you're technically only allowed to make 3 substitution breaks, but you can, increase the number of players to 6, which I think is really smart. Yeah. And they also increased the size of the bench that these teams are allowed to have, because typically you'd only have, I think, 10 players or so that you have on your bench, but now they've expanded it to like 16 or something like that. So they're just doing everything to try and, help out as much as they can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's pretty important. You're seeing it, if baseball ever figures their shit out, that is going to be, they're considering increasing the roster size, which makes sense. Again, it's, a lot of other people, a lot of other, it's like this weird, you're adding more bodies, which is the one thing you kind of don't want to do. But because of the fact that is, hey, we're running around a lot, we're being super active, and we haven't for such a long time, or at least not at this extent.
Right.
You kind of have to. So it's kind of this like, well, this is a weird situation. We're trying to keep away from each other, but we're bringing more people into the situation. It makes sense. As long as you're following all the protocols, I think everything's going to be fine. Yeah, I mean, I think that's it. Anything else in terms of like the health and the player safety side of it? I think that's a pretty big chunk of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, and it's as we all know, it's going to change. Whatever they say for these first games this week, they might be like, "Ooh, this was a terrible idea. Let's adjust it." Because obviously they've never dealt with the situation before, so nobody truly knows what the best course of action is. So I think they're just going to call for a lot of patience from us as the fans, the players, everybody involved in it, because they just got to they need to remember that the priority is safety, is not just going out there and at the end of the day just playing a game. It's really there's people's lives that are going to be impacted by this. So who's to say? I know they have a plan for this year, but I'm sure it'll be different come the start of next season. We just don't know.
Yeah, we are. Everything is up in the air. And again, Bundesliga has been it feels like it's been back for about a month now, right? Like it feels like it came back end of May. Have you, again, you're a little closer to soccer than I am. You just pay attention to it more. Has there been anything that they have been doing that's been so well that some of these other European leagues are starting to adopt? Or is it kind of just hearsay and they're not really coming out and being like, we didn't think this would be good, but they've done it and it's worked? Like, has anything like that happened?
Well, from my understanding, I think everybody's kind of like, let's watch what they do and see how it works out, because they're like, we don't want to be the first ones to make some colossal mistake, or if it's going really great, be like, yeah, that was our idea. We'll do the same thing.
Yeah, right.
And from what I know, I haven't heard of any like huge hiccups or anything with the Bundesliga. So I would imagine that a lot of teams or a lot of leagues around the world will try and follow some forms of what they're doing. Of course, it varies. Like we were saying before, each country is kind of doing it their own way. The scheduling is going to be somewhat similar to what the Bundesliga did, where they're going to have a couple games a week. That's kind of a similar model that most teams will follow. It'll be interesting to see how they handle like the lack of crowd as far as noise, because there's been talks. I don't know if it's confirmed or not, but there's been talks that on the broadcast side for like the Premier League, they're going to use soundtracks that have been like pre-recorded from the FIFA video game. Actually, they're going to be using those. Like EA's like, yeah, you could take our stuff. Why not? So when we're watching it, I don't know if it's going to be pumped through the stadiums, but from the broadcast side of view, we're going to be able to hear some guy's going to be like behind the scenes, like DJing, almost putting on like the sound effects, which I appreciate, because that first week when the Bundesliga was back and it was just like quiet in the stadium, it felt strange. You need that environment, like I was saying before.
It's so weird. I agree, because I watched when it first came back. I mean, that was the first thing back since March. So of course I watched. Saturday morning 9:30. I was geared up. I had some bets in. I had some daily fantasy lineups in. Like I was ready. I was putting money down. Won a couple bucks too.
There you go.
Deal. But, no, it was super weird. And I was watching this past weekend, and they did have the crowd noise, and you can do it. They did it in such a way where you actually didn't even see the stands. they had it so it was just focused in on the stadium, that one wide angle, that one
Yeah.
wide shot. So you don't even realize, like, you can hear the crowd, but you don't see them, but you don't kind of make the connection that it was fake.
Right.
And I
Right.
kind of I fell right back into it. You're right. It's like that atmosphere is really weird. It got super weird. Again, I saw some two dudes just crackheads. The one guy very clearly concussed. It was kind of brutal, but they put him on a stretcher and picked him out. And then you start hearing the crowd like clap and like cheer because he was okay. And I was like, that's weird. That's a little over the top.
Yeah.
But it's just that less than the like cheering and the excitement. It's just more that murmur, that kind of just constant
Yeah, you need a little bit of
down
background noise. You don't want to just
Exactly.
have like silence and the announcers going. You need to have that little bit of the feel like you're really a part of the stadium. It makes such a
Exactly.
difference.
It absolutely did. I definitely enjoyed these last few weeks over that first week. That first week I thought it was gonna be
Yeah.
weird with fake noise. Changed my stance. Definitely way weirder without fake noise.
Oh,
So
for
I'm glad
sure.
that
It
they
was an
added
improvement.
something in. So talking about the Bundesliga a little bit, and I know I kinda messed up the intro, but we're here now, and this is why we
That's
do it live.
okay.
But,
No problem.
kinda threw a curveball at you. Wanted to see if you could, you work on your feet. In terms of Bundesliga, one thing that I've actually, again, I don't watch too much soccer in general. I watch the World Cup and I watch like the European Cup and then the North American one. And that's like about it. And in terms of like club soccer, um, I know you're a big Man City fan, so we'll get to
Oh,
that
absolutely.
in a
Yeah.
little bit. But what I have recently found out is that Bundesliga came back first, but they're one of the lower tiered in terms of country talent, let's call it, or teams talent. You have Bayern Munich, but after that, it's kind of, Dortmund a little bit and then some other dudes. In terms of, can you kind of rank, I guess, the countries and their leagues for us, just so people have an understanding of what we've been watching compared to, on Wednesday when we turn on the TV, what we will be watching?
Right. Yeah. It's one of those interesting things where it kind of like it's like a cycle almost, where every
Mhm,
couple of years there's another league that kind of rises
mhm,
to the top as far as having the most amount of good teams. If
mhm.
that makes sense. So. And it also depends how you want to quantify it, because if you measure it by, who's winning the Champions League the most, who's progressing the furthest, that kind of thing, it's hard to argue against the run that Spain has had the last couple of years, because they have the two giants, Barcelona and Real Madrid, who are
Mhm.
they're never going to be a bad team. They're
Yeah.
always going to be up there. They're always going to be every single year contending for every trophy they enter. Um, but similar to Germany, it's like we said, Bayern Munich again, powerhouse, always going to be incredible. They could win it any year. No, nobody would be like that. Would never be an upset. Um, but then after that, both of those, the Spanish and the German league, the level of teams significantly drops down.
Mhm.
Sure, there's some good teams in both those leagues that have had some European success, but never quite to the level that you'd see with the other big teams. And I think just a large part of that is when these players are, getting the opportunity to choose which league they want to play in.
Mhm.
For those that are good enough to have that choice, of course, that's not everyone, but it oftentimes seems like these players want to go to the Premier League, or they want to go and play, in Spain. It's something about Germany. I don't think you get as many of the highest caliber of players wanting to go there.
Mhm.
My speculation, but
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
um, what you see is, again, if you want to measure as far as a country's league talent wise, as far as their European progression in the Champions League, this past year there was more teams in England than anybody else getting it towards the end of the whole competition.
Mhm.
And it's not like any of these other countries aren't producing good talent. It's just that there's something about the English Premier League that, in my opinion, seems to have the most amount of teams that are capable of playing with anybody else. Like even a team that's in the Premier League that wouldn't be, not one of the big six. Like let's say you had a team like, I don't know, Newcastle, right? They're definitely not going to win the Premier League this year, but they're certainly capable, holding their own with anybody in some of the other leagues.
Mhm.
And I don't know if I'd have that same confidence with some of these teams, that are a little bit lower down the Bundesliga. And what's great about the Premier League in relation to some of the other leagues is that there's such a disparity, at least recently, in who's winning the title every year.
Mhm.
Germany, it's Bayern literally every single year. They're not going.
What was it, like 9 in a row or some
Yeah, like
ridiculous number they have?
they had it. Dortmund's challenged them a couple times, but again, it's just like Bayern is so far superior than anybody else. It's just like nobody even pays attention. 'Cause it's like, all right,
Mhm.
Bayern's got the title. What else could we play
Yeah,
for?
yeah, yeah.
And it's almost like the same thing in Spain, because it's like yeah, you have, Real Madrid, Barcelona, they're kind of going back and forth. Atletico Madrid's another team that can contend, but past those teams, it's like nobody else ever really challenges. Compared to the Premier League, the past 2 years are a bit of a poor example. It's this Liverpool City race, but you're never going to hear of a Leicester winning a title in like the Bundesliga. That was something incredible that you're only going to get in the Premier League type. And that's kind of what's great about the Premier League is seemingly every year you really can make an argument for several teams that have a chance to win the whole thing, because there are so many teams in the Premier League that are capable, have the talent, they have the depth on their roster. You don't necessarily see that as much in some of the other leagues. And the same is true for Italy. Italy's got a nice disparity as far as the level of talent, but again, there's not like any team in Italy that seems to be like head and shoulders above the rest of Europe. There's not like a Bayern Munich that plays in Italy. There's a little bit more disparity. But as far as Italy, there's Juventus, of course, with our friend Cristiano, who's a god, of course.
Yeah, actually our very good friend. We should get him on the podcast next time.
Oh,
I bring you on. I should bring him on. Yeah, that's not me, man. Sorry. Next time I'll bring him on.
Yeah. But again, you have Juventus, you have Milan, you have Inter, but then it's kind of like, there's Roma, but then it's like there's none of those teams that are truly going to challenge. There's Napoli, but it's like in the Premier League, there's like 4 or 5 teams every year that are capable of winning not only the Premier League, but winning the whole Champions League. So that's kind of what makes the Premier League so fun, is that there's, so many truly good teams in there. And that's why there's such a huge level of competition every single game. All of them matter so much.
Yeah. And I think, it's always very interesting to me whenever you hear people talk about soccer. They're not talking about La Liga. They're talking about Barcelona versus Madrid. They're not talking about Italy unless you're listening to mine and Justin's grandpa. He's talking about Roma. I'm pretty sure. Justin, please correct me. But everything else is you're talking about Juventus, especially these last couple years since Cristiano's gotten there. But when you hear people talk about soccer, they're usually talking about the EPL. And they're talking about everything that's going on. I mean, you have Man City, you have Man United, you have that Leicester story from a couple years ago, which was, what were they, like plus 10,000 or something? And
the odds on the beginning of the season were 5,000 to 1. Yep.
Exactly. Like that put $3, man. Put $3 down on that. Like, that's fantastic. And it's so cool. I mean, Liverpool, as we're going to be talking about in a little bit, Arsenal. Like, there's just so many teams that you hear. And you say Newcastle, I've absolutely heard of them before. Crystal Palace, if I'm not mistaken, which is by far one of the coolest names in all of sports.
It's a great name.
Like, there's so many teams that you hear from the EPL that, again, when you're talking about the other leagues, it's the only reason I know Dortmund is because I bet on them like a couple weeks ago, because it's the only thing that's happening, right? I've heard of Bayern Munich. I've heard of, some of these other major teams, but I couldn't tell you, 3 down. And that's why I do think it makes sense. This is one of the most famous and most popular sport leagues around the entire world.
Well, I think one of the hugest draws that's kind of why I got into the Premier League, is that, like you said, it's not only the recognition, but it's just that I feel like the style of play in general in the Premier League is a little bit more entertaining for like the casual fan, because it's a little bit more, fast paced, a little bit more trying to just get right at the goal, versus some of those other leagues which play a lot more possession, a lot more kind of, we'll, get our opponent to attack us, then we'll counterattack, versus the Premier League. A lot of these times they go out and these teams just go like all out. They try and just destroy each other, which I think makes it a little bit more entertaining than watching these guys just pass around for 60 minutes and then they get one little goal and then they pass around. It's like, I don't know. I like the more fast paced, the counterattacks are a little bit more intense. So I think that's a big part of it, in general.
I think it helps too that, again, they have some of the biggest teams in all of sports. So they have all the most money in all of sports, and some of these soccer contracts that are getting shelled out, we're talking just insane amounts of money. So I think that part's pretty cool too. One thing we will not touch upon here is loans and transfers, something I do not understand and something I don't really want to understand. It's confusing for me and my American sports brain, so we're just going to leave that one alone. But again,
fair enough. It is complicated. Yeah. For sure.
But I do appreciate you coming on to explain what we're going to be looking at again. So the EPL is starting on Wednesday. Do you know what that first game is? Now that I think about it, I wish I had that up first. Do you know who some of the early games,
as you mentioned earlier, I'm a diehard Man City fan, so I'm very excited. They're one of the opening games this Wednesday. They play against Arsenal, who is my brother Nick's favorite team. So boo Arsenal. I'm not worried about that game.
Arsenal.
So that'll be good, because those are like 2 of the big 6 teams in the Premier League. So anytime you get any matches between those, it's always really entertaining. So that's what I'm really looking forward to. And then the rest of the teams, will be in action again this weekend. I know
Mhm.
there's another game this
Is there
Wednesday as well.
Yeah, it looks like there's 2 games Wednesday. Aston Villa,
Aston
versus
Villa, yep.
thank you.
Another
Oh,
really cool name. Yeah.
okay. Also, awesome name. And Sheffield United are playing at 1 o'clock on Wednesday. Man City Arsenal is at 3:15. Friday, we have a couple games. Norwich City, Southampton, Tottenham, and Man United. And then, yeah, Saturday we have a bunch. And Sunday we have a bunch. Yeah. So
Right.
Wednesday on, man, it sounds like you're gonna have a pretty great weekend, and I think you might even be spending some of it by yourself. So I think this is gonna be pretty good for you, huh? But
Yeah.
I guess in terms of the standings, what I have been told and what your show notes say, and what the point standings say is it's pretty much over. Correct, Liverpool? It's
Oh yeah.
pretty much done.
Yeah, Liverpool this year were like on a whole nother level. Like it was like, you saw Man City last year, and I thought that was like the craziest thing ever. But then it's like
Mhm.
Liverpool's like, hold my beer, we'll show you
Yeah.
how to do it now. So from that perspective, it's been a little bit of a dull season for the title this year. But from just watching the pure talent and entertainment that Liverpool provided, it's been pretty incredible. They've broken so many records, and they're gonna. It's too bad that things turned out the way they did, because they could have achieved things that nobody had ever come close to. They would have far surpassed City's 100 points, which was their record at the time. They would have gone above and beyond. So at this point, it's I mean, all but guaranteed. They would have to lose like every single game for the end of the year, which
Mhm.
is not going to happen. They actually have a chance to win the title as early as next week officially,
Mhm.
which is pretty exciting for them, of course, because they haven't won the Premier League in since the 90s. So they've been
Oh
waiting a
wow.
long time. So they deserve it. And it really it depends on what happens with Man City this week. Like if they lose this week on Wednesday and Liverpool win this weekend, then Liverpool win the title,
Oh, okay.
already guaranteed. But if City win and all that Liverpool needs to do is get 2 more wins this year, and it's guaranteed.
Mhm.
So that'll be very exciting for them. They have a chance to, if City lose, which they won't because Arsenal sucks,
Arsenal sucks. Boo.
If City were to lose, it would be cool for Liverpool because they will be able to win it at one of their big rivals against Everton this weekend. So that would be exciting for all of the fans, the bragging rights, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
That's always fun, and
um,
I didn't realize that it's been so long since Liverpool has won the EPL, so I think that's kinda nice. Again, talking about some of those other leagues, Bayern Munich, I think 9 in a row, I think shorted them. I think it might be closer to, like, 13 or something ridiculous, as you said, with
yeah.
Spain. There's really only 2 teams in Spain that you have to worry about. Italy, same thing. I mean, I assume France is PSG or bust. I don't really know
Oh yeah, yeah.
how France
PSG is
work,
same
so
thing.
it's
Yeah.
exactly. So it's just one of those things where, it's honestly, these leagues kind of for most of the time, other than the EPL, it really just sounds like they're warm-ups to get to the Champions League, which is kind of funny, and we'll be talking about that in a second. So I guess is there anything else to be I mean, obviously sports are coming back, so we're going to watch. Obviously, you're a very big fan of the league and of a specific team, Man City, as we spoke about. Is there anything really to pay attention to these next couple weeks? I mean, are there, as you said, there were some records that could have been broken. Now there's not. But why should I be tuning in outside of the money that I'm putting down on the games? Why should I be tuning into these games? And what are some of the things that can actually come from, some of the next few weeks?
Yeah, so like we were saying, even though the title is all but totally clinched, there still is a lot of things that can heavily change this year. Starting at the top of the table, there's still the fight for the Champions League spots,
Mhm.
and that's going to be very interesting because there's arguably 6 or 7 teams who are genuinely fighting for those spots, um, and it's a little murky as far as how they're going to finish out the whole thing with Man City, and if they're going
Mhm.
to be allowed to play again next year. That should be decided early July. I'm hoping they'll be okay,
Oh,
but
I forgot that huge scandal, right? That huge scandal in like February. It came to January, February, right?
yeah, yeah. I think it was on literally on like Valentine's Day. They're like, "Here you
Yeah.
go. You're going to be banned for 2 years. Happy Valentine's
Yeah.
Day."
Ooh. Well, hey.
But from what I understand, again, it's super complicated legalese. I truly have no idea all that intricate stuff. But more or less, Man City supposedly lied about some of their funds and transfers and things like
Mhm.
that. Man City's like, "What the heck are you talking about? We've been totally open and honest." So it's going to be very interesting because if Man City were to actually win their appeal, it's going to make the UEFA judicial board look like crap because it's going to be like we're totally wrong. This team totally put us in our
Yeah.
place, so it's going to be like they're going to lose all their power.
Mhm.
Um, But on the alternate side, it's like if Man City loses, not only from my fandom, it's going to like totally screw up all their finances. Their players are going to want to leave. It's a whole mess. So
Mhm.
no matter what happens, there's going to be a lot of upset people.
Yes, and let's be
um,
honest, if you're not corrupt in soccer, you're not doing it right. Like, that's just, like, something I've learned from afar. If you're not being corrupt in some way, shape, or form, come on, man, why are you even playing the game? So,
yeah,
that's interesting to hear. So we have the 4 top, it's 4 teams, correct, that go to the Champions League?
right. Yeah. So it's well, what'll be interesting. It really again it all depends on what Man City's doing, but the way that England gets guaranteed 4 spots into the Champions League. Um, it's it's the top 4, maybe top 5. The City doesn't get in. But then the other interesting thing is that whoever wins the Champions League this year gets an automatic buy-in to next year.
Okay.
Um, so again, that would potentially be like Man City still in the competition if they were to win it. Who's going to get that spot and their England spot?
Oh,
So that
that's
would be potentially
funny.
2 spots up for grabs. So
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know what the tiebreaker would be as far as that thing. I would assume whoever loses to City in the final gets their spot if that were to happen.
Mhm.
Um, but as far as the other teams, there's several teams that can really fight for it. It's definitely going to be Liverpool. But then the other 3 spots would be potentially Leicester, which would be really fun. It could be Chelsea. It could be Man United, which I really hope it's not because I hate them. And there's even a chance that there's a team called the Wolverhampton Wolves, who
Oh,
are a very cool team. Yeah.
let's go.
They had that guy Traore on the team. I don't know if you saw. He was like he could play in the NFL. He's like super jacked. But yeah, they'd be a really fun team. They're right on. There's potential. They got a couple matchups left this season with some of these other teams fighting for the spot, so that could really go either way. And not only as fans of these teams is this huge, but you think about the amount of money that these teams get from the TV deals from playing in the Champions League. So we're talking tens of millions of dollars for just being in this competition.
Mhm.
So it's huge, and especially in this time where all these teams are losing money like they never have before, the opportunity to get some of that back would be tremendous. So there's going to be a lot of intrigue, as far as what to watch for on the top end. And then on the other side of the table, there's also something that's always fun to watch, unless your team's down there, is the relegation battle,
Mhm.
which thankfully Man City has not been in issues with that for a long time. So every year, it's something that I wish you could see in every single sport across the world is the bad teams not just giving up to get better draft picks, is these teams are literally fighting for their ability to stay in the Premier League, for all the financial stuff, but also for the embarrassment of getting dropped down.
Mhm. Yep.
And that I can't even imagine what that would feel like as a player, as a fan of the club, anybody involved. It's like, what a terrible feeling.
Mhm.
And that's going to be a very, very close finish right there, because again, just like the top, there's probably 6 or 7 teams who realistically are fighting to stay up. Of those teams, Norwich is in dead last right now. They're 6 points from the team right above them, and they're pretty far from
So,
safety.
just to clarify, is it just a single team that gets dropped down and then one team would come up from that second division? Like, how does that process work?
Yeah, so the way it works is in the Premier League, the bottom 3 teams, they get relegated, so they drop down. And then in the second division team, which is called the Championship, whoever wins the championship gets an automatic berth into the Premier League.
Mhm.
And then what they would typically do, I don't know how they're doing it this year, but what they would typically do is for the other 2 spots, they would have 4 teams playing like a mini tournament for those last 2 spots,
Very cool.
which is pretty cool. So, I would imagine they would probably follow a similar protocol as normal, but
Mhm.
again, that's been up for
Yeah.
debate. And what's really intriguing is that for these teams in the relegation battle, a lot of them they rely so heavily on their home games because they need that little bit of help they get from their fans. Any difference it can
Mhm.
make. And now that
Mm.
they're losing that chance this year, it's like it's totally going to shift everything, which really stinks for some of these teams, because it's like had the schedule been different, they might have played some of the easy teams early in the year when they had these fans there. But now some of these guys are getting stacked up against the really big teams, so it's like they're kind of in not a
Yeah.
great place.
That's
Um,
really interesting, especially when you do bring that into effect. I mean, soccer and the fans, it's the 2 sports that I would say get affected the most by fans would be college football, because they're like 18-year-old kids, and then soccer because half of them are like 18-year-old kids. So I think that part is really interesting, and you make a really good point that doesn't even really cross my mind, especially those bottom teams. That is something that they're really, really fighting to make sure they get out of, because if I can't remember which game it is, but it's like considered the most like lucrative game in the world. It's either that last team, the team from the second division moving up, or it's that last, like one of those last team relegations to move down. Because I think the game itself, if you win and you move up to Champions League, it's essentially worth like $150 million because you get all the TV rights and you get all the other opportunities and all these other things. So it's always very interesting to kind of see how that works. And I totally agree, man. I wish, like, why were the Browns in the NFL for like 10 years, Derek?
Why couldn't
I
they
don't
get like
understand it.
dropped down to the CFL or something somehow?
Exactly. Like, get the hell out of here. Give it to the XFL. That would have been cool.
Yeah.
XFL, but that's RIP XFL. So I like that, especially because again, I don't understand, but they're against a playoff system. Doesn't make any sense to me. You say money and you think they would come running, because even if you just put the top two teams against each other, that would be bigger than the Super Bowl. And it's not even a question, I don't think. But that's another conversation for another day. With the fact that there is still something to play for, especially these bottom teams, it sounds like just that middle chunk that's just kind of chilling at this point. What is the point for some of these players to come back and risk their health? Just to kind of name out, like Nick says, don't give up on Arsenal, but I'm sorry, dude. Just kind of looking at the standings. I mean, if they can make it to 5, because technically, if Man City's then kicked out, so I guess they're only a few points behind. So that actually makes sense. But a team like Newcastle, a team like Brighton, it doesn't really look like they're going to drop down that far. I mean, why do some of these players, Crystal Palace, to name another, like, why are some of these players even considering coming back? Like, what the heck's the point at that? Like, why?
Well, I think there's probably, two big reasons. Number one is the reason why most of these guys are playing is that they love the game. So I think they just want to get back to that normalcy.
Makes sense.
They want to do what they enjoy. They want to, get back with these teammates of theirs that have become like family over the years. And then the other side of it is that at the end of the day, all of these guys are playing for their jobs. So it's not like in some others, like if they were superstars, they guarantee they're going to play again next year. But a lot of these guys aren't not necessarily in that position. So a lot of them, towards the end of the season are trying to impress not only their coaches, but potential scouts from all these other teams that would, swoop in over a normal summer transfer period and grab them up. So I think that's probably their hugest incentive is to, bring that back, that sense of normalcy that they've been craving. And it's just, they want to market themselves. They want to, make themselves presentable, because a lot of these guys are going to be moving around at the end of the season. And, who knows what their future will hold. So if they're holding out, they might not necessarily have the opportunity to play again, moving forward. And as far as like just these middle teams in general, at the end of the season, every team in the Premier League gets part of this big prize money fund. So it's like the higher up the table you are, the more money you get. So it's like there's always that incentive to play for too. And individually, all of these guys have all these really intricate contracts that say, like, if you start this amount of games, if you score this many goals, if you complete all these little things that, the money's always a part of it.
Incentives, man. Incentives. They work pretty damn well. So that seems like a pretty solid rundown of the Premier League. I mean, can we, like, there's only how many games they're only playing? I can't remember.
So they play a total of some teams have just 9 left, and a couple have 10 left. That's all that they have.
Okay. So can we start looking ahead to next year already? Or are we really, are we going to go Champions League first? And then, like, how does the schedule work? Like, when players can start to move, as you were saying before?
Well, in a normal world,
true.
with
In a
everything that's
normal
going
world,
on, a lot of the player contracts typically end at the end of June, because that's kind of like the European soccer fiscal year, whatever you want to call it. It's usually like their contracts go June to June. Because in a typical year, all the leagues will be wrapped up by then. The Champions League would be done. They're kind of in their international break, where if there's like a World Cup, a European Championship, Copa, whatever, that's when those guys go off and do that. But that's kind of their off period. Now, pretty much everybody's contracts have been extended to the end of whatever their league season is, or potentially, extended further depending on the situation. So that's been a very complex thing. I don't know all the intricacies of that, but I know that, like, for example, on Manchester City, there's a guy called David Silva whose contract was set to expire this year, but he totally got it rearranged, so he was able to finish out however far they go in the Champions League, anything like that, and then he'll move on, that kind of thing. So
that makes sense. Yeah, I mean,
I think most players would do that.
They'd be stupid if they acted like the Major League Baseball, right? Like they would be dumb to let this amount of money really get in front of everything, so that way no one makes any money, rather than everybody makes some money. I don't know. Just seems like a novel concept that some other leagues around the world could really pay attention to and take advantage of, not being salty at all. So it sounds like we did a pretty damn good job. You did a pretty damn good job at explaining what's going on with the EPL. And now I guess so top 4 teams are going to the Champions League for next season, but the Champions League from this past season is still going on. And I know we just got
Yep.
some recent information. How comfortable are you describing a little bit of that information for us for these next and do they have a timetable when it's going to start, when it's going to end, anything like that? What how much do you know at this point?
Yeah, so ever since the competition was suspended, they've been throwing out ideas how to finish it up, and thankfully they reached the decision early on that they were going to postpone everything until all of the leagues were concluded from their
Mhm.
domestic cups, because they knew that there's no way to coordinate all the games they had to play, all the travel, and all that stuff. So they initially, when this whole thing started, they said we're going to suspend it till everybody wraps up their domestic leagues, and then we'll have a condensed version of the remainder of the Champions League tournament. Um, and initially, or typically, I should say, the Champions League, what they do at this stage is they play, home and away leg between the two teams as they progress up until the final.
Mhm.
But now, obviously, since travel is so impacted, they don't want anybody going to different countries multiple times, potentially
Makes sense.
spreading it, that type of stuff. So what they did, which I'm really excited for, is they came up with the idea and said, let's just do it one quick tournament, kind of like a World Cup style type thing, all in one place, which was great. And they were kind of throwing out different host cities. They were saying what's going to be a city that's handled the situation pretty well in general. What's going to be a good city as far as the proximity of the airport to the stadiums, like things like that. And what they did was they settled on playing in Lisbon in Portugal. And I think one of the main reasons, like I said, was the proximity to the airport. It was easy for all these countries to get there. They have two major stadiums inside the city, so they were able to rotate, not just play in like one big stadium and just destroy the field, that
Yeah.
kind of thing. And from my understanding, what they're going to be doing, like literally they decided, a couple hours ago, is that they're going to have the remainder of the games played out over about 12 days. They're going to, some of the quarterfinals had already finished up. Like Liverpool's been eliminated by Atletico Madrid, stuff like that. Like that's going to stand. But there's other teams like Manchester City and Real Madrid who had played their first leg, but they never got to play their second leg.
Mhm.
So they'll finish up their second leg, and then they'll continue to play as far as they progress throughout the tournament. So that should be really exciting to have all these great teams that are in one city playing through 10, 12 days, whatever it is. Make for some great TV, and
That is
I'm
that
looking
is
forward to
definitely awesome.
that.
And did they say, did they have like tentative dates? I missed it if you said it.
Yeah, I believe it's like August like 8th or something like that. I forget the exact date, but it's like the
Mhm.
first half of August they're going to try and wrap it up because they have to already get started on their next
Yeah.
these next competitions, because typically most of these countries would start their normal season in August. So
Mhm.
everything's being slightly pushed back, but it's going to be interesting to see how they all do all that, because this is all still pending teams being okay to travel. This is all pending governments being like, yeah, we're
Mhm.
going to let all these people come, that kind of stuff.
Yes.
So it's not as simple as just UEFA's like, we're going to play soccer, so
Yeah.
it's going to be interesting.
It's not, but again, there's enough money involved. And Nick, when's your bachelor party again? I think it's gonna land somewhere in there, which is gonna be pretty sweet. So
It should work out
very,
well. Yeah,
very excited for that. I mean, for your bachelor party, we went and hung out and we watched the World Cup. So for
that was
Nick's, why
incredible.
not? We'll
Yeah.
watch the Champions League because it sounds like games are just gonna be on all day and we'll get to enjoy the heck out of that. So very excited.
Oh, there goes my dog.
Chachi, my goodness, Chachi, what is wrong? You can't even see me. Why is he so angry? I don't get it.
I don't know, man. He's
Um,
crazy. He
it's
needs more
okay.
Prozac or something like that.
Don't we all, man? Don't we all? So I messed up. Now looking back at the notes, I kind of went Champions League first, but there was some more about relegation. Do you kind of want to talk about some of the teams that you think have the, I guess, best or the worst shot at getting relegated this year? Because it seems like there's actually a few that are kind of in the running, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, so kind of as I'd said before, I think Norwich is all but guaranteed to be out.
Mhm.
They're in dead last. They have a tough remaining schedule. They play several of the higher end teams, so they're pretty
Mhm.
much guaranteed they're going to be one of the three.
Okay.
Then as far as the other two, that truly is anybody's guess. What I was thinking was looking at their schedule, seeing who they had as far as some of the more difficult opponents, and based on the remaining schedules of these teams, I think it's probably going to be Aston Villa or Brighton would be the other two.
Mhm.
But that being said, there's several other teams. There's Bournemouth, there's Watford, there's West Ham. These all teams are within 2 points of each other, 3 points of
Mhm.
each other. So it's truly going to come down to for some of these teams the very last game of the season. It's going to be all or nothing in those situations. Um, and a big part of it is going to be also their goal differential, because that's their first tiebreaker.
Mhm.
So if they're level on points, they go to goal differential, they go to head to head, and so on and so on. But
Yeah.
goal differential is going to be huge because a lot of these teams have been getting pummeled all season. They get crushed by some of these other teams, 4 or 5-0. So that it's really going to be interesting to see how these guys try to strategically stay alive
Mhm.
because as you said before, the money, the desire to just play in their eyes, probably the best league in the
Mhm.
world, like all these things they want to stick around for. Um, because I know it's hard to truly calculate the difference between playing in the Premier League but playing in the Championship. But some estimates I was able to find, they said that a team that drops down from the Premier League loses pretty much $50 million in their first year, £50 million, sorry, in their
Oh,
first year, which is
that's like
tremendous.
75 million if very quick, poor math is right. Yeah, that's a lot of money. My goodness.
Yeah. And for a lot of these clubs, especially now that are really on the verge of bankruptcy, that is, life or death
Yeah.
for signing good players, for not even dropping further down because there's like 5 divisions in England. So you can keep dropping depending on how crappy you do. So it's
Mhm.
like you don't want to go down that slope. They do get these things called parachute payments, which kind of help them out a little bit. Like, yeah, well, you got relegated, so we're going to try and help you not
Mhm.
totally bottom out. But even
Yeah.
so, you're still losing all that money. So if you're a betting man like Justin or Mike, I'd put my money on Norwich, Aston, and Brighton. But then again,
Yep.
could be anyone.
You never know. Maybe I'll put a couple bets in then. We'll see how that goes. And then so moving forward, as you said before, the usually contracts end in June because the season is finished by then. It looks like we're going obviously further than that at this point. I mean, we have at least 10 games left. I know they're trying to smash this down, but how many? Yeah, I have to assume it's at least like five. I have to guess like 5 days between games, right? So that's still another like almost 2 months, like
Well,
50,
it's going
60
to
days.
vary.
Like, how does that work?
I think some weeks are going to be a little bit more heavy. Like some weeks they might play like 3 games, but other weeks they might get like a week off. It's going to kind of be like I think they're going to ease into it a little bit. Like in the beginning of this, they're going to have like 2 games a week. That's it. But then like there might be a couple weeks where they're playing, every 3 days or so,
Wow.
just because they got to get it done, and there's
Yeah.
really not an alternative to it.
So what, like in terms of starting the next season, I think you put here in the notes that it's supposed to start originally slated to start August 8th. I mean, when like are there numbers floating around? Like we've been hearing since the NBA was on pause, everyone was like, "Oh, this is perfect. They'll just start it on Christmas like they should anyway." And the NBA comes out and they're like, "Yeah, we probably should just start it on Christmas." So this works out really
Yeah.
well. Like, is there anything like that? Because now all these contracts are going to get moved around. The ramifications for next season, obviously, this season is very obvious, but next season in all of these sports, I think it's going to become obvious when we get there. Are they going to shorten seasons? Have there been like any at least conversations that you've read or heard about yet?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the leagues were waiting to see what the Champions League was going to do, and if they go forward with this plan, I think they can actually start to hammer down a specific date because um, from the beginning of all this, when they agreed like August is going to be we're going to be done with our titles or our domestic
Mhm.
leagues by August. We'll finish up the Champions League ideally around then, and then probably September has been going to be when they'll start it back up again. I know if this plan goes forward with Champions League, they're not going to start up again until October. They're going to wait a month or so in between. Um, and they're even looking as far out to changing the whole schedule up until the next World Cup, actually, because I don't know how familiar you are. The next World Cup is supposed to be in the winter, which is going to be a little bit different.
Oh yeah, because it's Qatar, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Qatar, Qatar. I call it Qatar. I don't
I have no idea. Yeah,
know.
whatever. Someone
But
correct
yeah,
me if you want, but
so since it's the weather there is so hot in the summer that all these countries are like, there's no way we're coming to you guys in June. Like it's going to be absurd
yeah.
for the players and for all these people coming to this country. So they're like, no, we're going to shift it to playing in November. So at that point, they're like, yeah, we'll have to adjust all the seasons now, but in a way, it might potentially work out slightly better because they can shift everything that couple of months out. You
Mhm.
know, so it kind of might work out that way where if they, the normal start date will be in August, if they push it back a little bit, they're going to have to adjust, of course, the European Championship,
Mhm.
which is supposed to be this summer, they're going to have to adjust that next summer, the timing of it, and things like that. So um, I think it's hard for any of these leagues just to plan that far in advance because,
Oh yeah.
who knows what's going to happen. So it's kind of like they take it a couple months at a time.
Yeah, I mean, who would have guessed corruption and a pandemic just go absolutely hand in hand, man? How fantastic is that? And I guess so. We spoke about it for a second before, but again, I don't understand the transfers. I don't understand the loans. I feel like that's another 50 minutes on its own just for me to understand it. I guess like if they condense the schedule to that point, if they make it so that everything is, we're ending in August and starting in October, is there enough time to conduct all this business that needs to be done, or are some of these things kind of already being discussed on the table before they really pull the trigger? It's kind of already almost finalized before they just kind of put their name on the paper. How does it normally work like that?
Well, a huge part with all of these leagues and all of these teams and the governing bodies and all that is like we were saying before. A lot of it's just about the kind of money they're going to be making,
Hmm.
and it's really hard for all these teams to agree to something, especially right now in the middle of the season. Um, because like even just restarting the Premier League, there's a lot of these teams that we're saying on the relegation side that were like, this is not fair. How can we finish out a season? We don't get the opportunity to play in front of our fans, that kind of
Yeah,
stuff. And they have a point to that, of course, but it's like I think that regardless of the changes they make, they're going to make people upset. They're going to have disagreements, So it's kind of
that's expected.
so in my eyes, it kind of seems like they're thinking, long term, of course, like what are we going to do next year? But right now, I think their focus has always just been let's finish up this season, see how it goes, and then depending on what type of things that are successful, we can carry that moving forward. There's been talks about shortening the schedule. There's been talks about, when they first talked about restarting the Premier League, they said we might not even relegate anyone. We might just keep the teams the way they are for the sake
Mhm.
of scheduling and all that stuff. So um, it's very complicated because there's so many, too many cooks in the kitchen, if you will. There's too many teams and too many people that have input on these things. So it's not like it's just one person in charge of everything. And as we've said many times, there's always that little bit of corruption, that little bit of backdoor stuff that we don't know what's happening. Um, they've been trying to be more transparent ever since the Sepp Blatter thing, but
Mhm.
they're not
Yeah.
perfect by any means.
Yeah, it is what it is. I don't know, man. As I was saying earlier, if there was now thinking about it, if there was ever a time to implement a just a championship matchup, one versus two, I think they'd make a lot of that money back just in the TV
Yeah.
rights alone worldwide. I think Amazon would pay $1 billion for that alone. And I think they recoup a lot of the money that they saved. So if anyone from the EPL wants to talk, I'm more than open to taking a finder's fee on that idea. And I'll graciously share some of it with my co-host today, Jeremy Wright. Jeremy, this was absolutely fantastic. I think we did a pretty killer job at covering all this stuff. I had a couple mix-ups, but I think other than that, no one really noticed. And I think it was a great stuff. So thanks, Jeremy. I
Yeah.
appreciate your time today, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I was happy to be on. I'll definitely like to come back. There's
Yeah.
always more soccer to talk about. In a couple of weeks, you never know what's going to be different in the world of sports in general. So I was happy to be a part of
Hopefully
this.
hopefully more sports, and if anyone out there is listening, Jeremy, as I said, he had a shout out on a previous episode with his soccer coach, Peter Urich, author, speaker, coach, but Jeremy actually gets brought up a lot. Whenever I talk about teachers, this is the gentleman I am talking about. So anyone out there noticing, now can put a voice to the name. If you're watching, put a face to the name, know that he helps our youth, and we appreciate him there. But thank you so much, Jeremy Wright, all around great dude, good friend of mine. Appreciate your time today, brother.
Absolutely. My pleasure.